Over the years, NATO has wanted to attack Russia. To this end, the alliance has been actively expanding in Eastern Europe. That is why Russia was forced to attack Ukraine before Ukraine became a member of NATO and attacked Russia. They left us no choice. You have just heard an abridged version of the Russian propaganda narrative about NATO's expansion in Europe. In their reflections, Putin and other Russian politicians refer to a promise allegedly made by Western leaders to Mikhail Gorbachev at the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of East and West Germany. We were promised that NATO would not move an inch eastwards. But has Russia really been given a promise not to expand NATO? Is it officially written down somewhere? And more generally, was it really NATO that pursued the policy of expansion? It's time to delve into the context. Let's start with the fact that Mikhail Gorbachev denied the very fact of such a promise to the German TV channel ZDF back in 2014.
Миф действительно.
Moreover, according to Gorbachev, negotiations were later held at Camp David, USA, where all parties agreed that the new independent state would decide where to join. West Germany joined NATO in 1955. East Germany was a satellite state of the USSR and fully under its influence. When the Berlin Wall came down, the country was reunited and the eastern part automatically became part of NATO. The second question is whether NATO has the authority to promise either to expand or not to expand. The North Atlantic Treaty, like the United Nations, was created in the aftermath of the Second World War. Under Article 5 of the NATO Charter, if one of the allies is the victim of an armed attack, all other allies will consider that act of violence as an armed attack against them all, and will take all measures they deem appropriate to come to the assistance of the ally so attacked. One for all and all for one. This principle ensures that even the smallest country can count on the protection of all member states. This is the core value of NATO membership. You may be surprised, but NATO's expansion has been very cautious and slow. NATO does not initiate the accession of new countries on its own. To join NATO, a country must submit an application, become a candidate for membership, and then meet the conditions for accession. Once its application has been assessed, the country is granted candidate status. It must then meet a number of conditions and implement NATO standards. Only after assessing the fulfillment of all the conditions set to the current member states, vote on whether to accept the new member or not. What would motivate someone to accept this NATO quest? Probably a sense of military threat. And since the fall of the Berlin Wall, only Russia has provoked a sense of danger in European countries. 1991. Russia invades Moldova. Seeing this, Poland applied for NATO membership in October 1992. The question why did Warsaw want to join NATO is rhetorical. This quote from Poland's first president Lech Walesa speaks for itself. We're all afraid of Russia. As soon as Russia adopts an aggressive foreign policy, it will be directed against Poland and Ukraine. Poland, along with the Czech Republic and Hungary, finally joined the alliance in 1999, marking an 8-year journey from application to membership. It seems that NATO is in no hurry to expand. Meanwhile, in 2003, Russia sparked another conflict, this time in the Black Sea by attempting to build a dam between the Taman Peninsula and the Ukrainian island of Tuzla. With these actions, Russia confirms its aggressive policy. It was therefore not surprising that NATO's next major enlargement took place a year after Tuzla. In 2004, Bulgaria, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia and Estonia joined the alliance. It can be concluded that it was not NATO that provoked Russia to defend itself. It is Russia made an expansionist policy towards Moldova, Georgia and Ukraine, and it is Russia that for years has systematically provoked European countries to seek protection from such an aggressive neighbor. In 2014, Russia invades Ukraine and eventually occupies Crimea, and in 2022, Russia launches a full-scale military invasion of independent Ukraine. These aggressive actions had the expected effect. Finland joined NATO in April 2023. Sweden is awaiting ratification of its NATO membership treaty, and Ukraine no longer sees a secure future without alliance membership or an alternative option of integration guarantees from partner countries. So it turns out that it is not NATO threateningly creeps closer to Russia, but Russia's own aggressive actions that are driving more and more countries to join NATO, seeking protection from the main aggressor in Europe in the 21st century.
And that's just the long story short on a quick history of NATO that explains why it's really not a matter of NATO expanding towards Russia. But Russia's aggressive action has driven countries into the waiting arms of NATO. The truth of the matter is that Russia wants the world to believe that they are the victim, that they have been subjected to this evil advancement of Western influence on their country. Instead, it is their own actions that have actually driven those countries to join. Nobody was out there saying, you know what, Poland, you should join NATO. Poland said, doggone it, I got Russia right here. They're trouble. They've been causing trouble. They caused trouble in Georgia. They caused trouble in Moldova. They've caused trouble everywhere. Now I want some protection. So they joined NATO. By the way, if you do hear that, it is the day for a normal siren test here in where I live. So the siren's probably going to go off for about 30 seconds or so if you hear it. I don't know. It seems pretty quiet today. But by the way, I'm Brian. Thank you for joining me today for today's Ukraine update. We've got a lot of stuff that's gone on over the last 4 days. So with all this news, let's go ahead and dive right on into it. By the way, that video I found it through Spravdi or Stratcom Center. It was produced by the European Union to express the situation with NATO. It's accurate. I have double-checked the facts in it just to make sure, and the timings line up. So I appreciate them putting together a really easy primer on the situation with NATO so that it's easy to understand and where people are able to move forward with better information, which is why I chose it for the intro today. Hey, what do you know? I'm educational as well as news related. It was a rough weekend for Russia's Black Sea Fleet as yet another Russian warship managed to get taken out by Ukrainian drones. There's some additional video footage of this from a different perspective, so we'll play that in just a moment or two here. But the Sergei Kotov was a patrol ship of I believe it was the 22160 class, Project 22160. Another warship, this time it was on patrol in the Kerch Strait. So the location where it got taken out, near Feodosia and Kerch, is really interesting. The location is particularly interesting because I did kind of do a quick tour of what other people were saying about the situation there. And I saw some people declaring that the Kerch Bridge itself had been hit again. There is no indications that I've been able to find of that being accurate, and the traffic on the Kerch Bridge was resumed some hours later. This appears to be the actual attack. What actually was struck? This ship was taken out by Ukrainian unmanned aquatic vehicles here. Multiple hits were recorded. And I kind of have the video playing in the background here. Let's go ahead and move on to some of the details. This was a pretty significant attack. The understanding I have is that it suffered about 5 direct hits, and 5 more drones were not able to actually engage the ship. One actually stood off and monitored the situation. So interesting. I think I've got it somewhere in here, but my recollection as well is that a tugboat actually came to try and assist the foundering ship. And it was the tugboat that actually destroyed the last drone, according to Russian reports. So maybe that's why tugboats are always accompanying Russian warships. It's not for assistance with getting those ships to move around, but they're better surface combatants than the actual warships themselves. Here's the video that is purported. Now, I'm going to put that in absolute terms here. It's purported to be the moment the Sergei Kotov was actually struck, and they report that there are other ships nearby. Oh, come on. Play the video. Let me refresh this real fast. I do have it muted because often these have got copyrighted music running over them. And so I've just got that, just playing the video itself. You can see the machine gun fire and even some of the heavier stuff hit, and then the explosion. And that's when the guy runs back to get back to his station. Apparently, this might have been a nearby tugboat or something like that. We don't know for sure. The prosecutor's general office over in Russia is charging 2 Russian soldiers with, never mind, that's not related to this. So that was meant for later, so ignore that. They do state that 50 of the crew members managed to evacuate from the vessel. There were some nearby ships that were able to respond, including the tugboat, as I mentioned. 7 were killed and 6 injured, however, and the remaining 50 managed to get off relatively unscathed. There was also a Ka-29 helicopter aboard, and it's reported that when the ammunition magazine went up, it destroyed the helicopter that was sitting on the landing pad. Interestingly, Russia planned to install air defenses on Sergei Kotov in the next few months here, but it looks like that's no longer going to be a required upgrade for the ship. This took place south of the Cape of Tekil, and that really means that the Ukrainian UAVs are managing to really range far and wide in the Black Sea. They're even going so far as to say there will be nowhere, including Novorossiysk, that will be not subject to Ukrainian drones in short order. A floating crane did show up to check out the Sergei Kotov. There are other reports that oil has been washing ashore in the area as well, indicating that the ship was significantly damaged when it sunk. Russian propagandists are now actually talking about evacuating the Black Sea Fleet from the Black Sea because they're finding that they're just not effectively able to do anything to assist the war. That's because Ukraine has been effectively able to make sure they can't assist in the war, which is why we're seeing these calls now. Every time they lose a major surface combatant, it's really big propaganda coup for Ukraine, and it looks like they're starting to see how much it's wearing on the public when they can put it out there. In total, since the beginning of the war, Ukrainian armed forces have disabled at least 15 ships of the Black Sea Fleet. That's almost a quarter of the ships, and by tonnage, I believe it is mostly the larger ships in the Black Sea Fleet, although there were some smaller ones as well. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to translate this just on the fly, but the report from the commander of the 184th Brigade for the protection of the water area of Novorossiysk, he detailed the destruction of his vessel with the 5 of these drone boats, etc. It sounds like it was a pretty intense firefight. The report, it took around 20 minutes of combat, and then the ship sunk around the 40-minute mark. So, by the way, hi, Paul. Glad to have you on board. We're right in the middle of talking about the Sergei Kotov that was sunk over the weekend here in a Ukrainian drone attack. They do show other sources of this video that all points to this being the Sergei Kotov, and it sounds like the crew even knew the enemy boats were in the water 40 minutes before the actual attack, with 2 of these boats actually striking both sides of the ship. And it did remain afloat after the attack, but when it was taken under tow, it actually sank. So that's the situation with the Sergei Kotov. Let's go ahead and move on to some other really interesting news that came up this weekend. At Karabulak, the Republic of Ingushetia, Russia, a violent shootout between police and an armed group took place that, according to rumors, is unrelated to Ukraine. However, this group had been previously involved in killing police officers in this area. But the shootout then stretched on more than 8 hours, and in fact was potentially still hot scene up to 24 hours later. It indicates that these men were not just prepared for this firefight with police, they were prepared and they were intending for it to go for a long time. Could this be just a criminal gang that got into the wrong situation with the cops? Or is it indications of potentially separatist movements over there? Really interesting to see what's going on. There is a report, this was actually from 8 hours after the start of the firefight. This happened on March 2nd, so we're talking several days now. But the really interesting thing is that soon after this 8 or 10 hours of this firefight had been going on, the Russians declared that it was terrorism, that the whole area was shut down, and they started bringing in all of their special forces that they could to take care of this situation. It really went on lockdown information-wise. So interesting to see. Not sure exactly what's going on, and it seems like news of this really quickly got canned. No way for it to get out from there. So we'll watch to see if there's more, but I'm not sure that we're going to see much more. Let's move on to the situation in Ukraine itself. An Estonian arms dealer who was supplying equipment to Ukraine did so at an inflated price, allegedly making, and I quote, millions of euros at the expense of the German taxpayers that were paying for the equipment. Sounds like he was a pretty shady character, and he knew that in war there is profit. Ukraine currently can produce 150,000 drones per month and may make it to 2 million drones by the end of the year, according to the Strategic Industries Deputy Minister. The drones have become a major aspect of the war, and when I've had conversations with people who have manned armaments and equipment, actual war soldiers that were doing so from multiple countries, they've all said that the situation with drones is such a change from when they were in the military. So I'm not talking to currently serving people. I'm talking to people who've been out of the military for some time. And they're saying that a lot of their equipment would have been tremendously vulnerable to drones. They would be really in the situation where they wouldn't be able to counter it with the equipment they had on hand. Many of them are either open top and easy to drop things into, or lightly armored, especially from the top. So the drones have really changed the battlefield overall. From Schmeil, Ukraine aims to reduce the number of ministries by 1/3. Now, I'm going to kind of talk about this in a couple of contexts here, particularly if you were paying attention to Javier Milei, which is Venezuela, I think it is. No, not Venezuela. Javier Milei from, I don't remember which country, a South American country. He got elected in, and the first thing he did is he ripped off about 2/3 of the government ministry equivalents. And they turned in an actual, not only balanced budget, but a budget surplus. It's in Argentina. Thank you, Paul. That's absolutely correct. The situation over there in Argentina was pretty dire financially, so they took a risk, and he immediately whacked off large chunks of dead weight out of the government, and that looks like, at least for now, they're on a pretty good course. Ukraine is kind of in the similar situation. They have a lot of the cruft of long-term governance that they've got to deal with. And so by reducing the number of ministries, they can, number one, combine some things and save some money, but it also reduces the bureaucratic overhead. And they've mentioned it multiple times that reducing that bureaucratic overhead is a vital part of their war activities. Hey, Robbie, glad to see you as well. I was a little bit sick this weekend, so I was not able to get on and get any of these updates in. I really felt bad about it, but I wanted to get back onto it as fast as I could. Really wanted to do this yesterday, but just it's been both. I've been under the weather and really busy at the same time, which is not a fun combination. But we're going to keep on going as best we can and get the daily updates at least as close as I can. Let's go ahead and move on. So that's an interesting change in governance for Ukraine there. This was a fascinating study to me in the resilience of Ukrainian electrical infrastructure here. They are now, as of day before yesterday, they plan to export 13 gigawatts of electricity out of Ukraine to Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and Moldova. That means that they're not just keeping up with their power requirements, they're producing excess, and they're maintaining the export routes, the cabling, and the wiring required to export electricity to other countries. While that is a financial boon, it really indicates that Ukraine is full bore doing everything they can to produce not just enough power for them, but enough excess capacity to deal with any problems that may arise. Moving over to news out of Russia. A drone attack on an oil depot in Belgorod resulted in the destruction of one tank. There was no injuries, according to Russian reports. There's a lot of things still going on with this one since it just came in just yesterday. But overall, just indicates that Ukraine is still going after Russia's lifeblood, which is their ability to export oil. They also let me back this up. This is from a state news source. Russian forces are claiming that Ukrainian forces have fired on a railway station in the Kursk region. They did not provide any evidence of it. It did start a fire. It damaged power lines, and the station itself knocked the power out to the village. But again, I have to put this one with a grain of salt because I've got one source, and it's a Russian state-owned news source. The Institute for the Study of War has a lot of things to say over the last few days here. Initially, they stated this. Recent relatively high Russian aviation losses appear to be prompting a significant decrease in Russian aviation activity in eastern Ukraine, although it is unclear how long this decrease in activity will last. Fast forward today, the next day, there it is. Russian forces appear to be willing to risk continued aviation losses in pursuit of tactical gains in eastern Ukraine, likely along the Avdiivka-Donetsk city line. Russia is absolutely going as fast as they can because they want to capture as much territory as they can while Ukraine is weak. It appears, and I'm just going to talking in general terms right now, that it appears that Europe is going to step up and try and fill the gap with that Czech proposal to get a bunch of artillery shells actually starting to bear fruit. There's reports that they have received a significant stockpile through that program already, though that's kind of rumor mill material right now. What I do know, and I believe I have later in this video, is reports from the Russians that they're starting to see that the Ukrainians are not holding back on using their shells again. So we'll see on that. That just appears to be a cause and effect going on right there. And from yesterday, Russian Security Council Deputy Chairperson Dmitry Medvedev promoted Russia's extensive territorial objectives that expand deep into Ukraine's territory. So let's go ahead and look at this map right here. And this is not the one they showed, although it lines out the exact same overall lines that they did on that map. You can see here that the Russians are looking at not just all of the territory on the Black Sea as well. They're looking deep into Ukraine, trying to claim that all of this territory is Russian and that they intend to take it. This is their starting point. This is what they believe they can get, leaving just this tiny section of Ukraine, which they just call Kiev, and basically gutting the entire nation, taking all of their productive farmland to speak of, all of their major industry, all of their natural resources, taking their ability to export via water. This leaves a nation neutered, is what it does. There's nothing left at this point as far as a self-sustaining nation if you gut it down to this point. And that, of course, should tell you what Russia's real goals are. You'll note that this would also put them right against Moldova and the Transnistria region. It would also put them in easy, it would basically give them full control of the Black Sea from edge to edge, because the only NATO countries will be along the western edge near the Bosphorus. This is not Russia's final goals, because there's been other indications of far more expansionist objectives. And it already appears that they are working on some provocations in the Baltic countries as well. From the Defense Intelligence Update, Rostec has declared that the T-14 main battle tank is too expensive to enter service and be deployed to Ukraine. Since it's such a high cost, they're going to be dealing with the situation in Ukraine with their much lower cost vehicles and equipment. The T-14 really has it's got a lot of trouble. My understanding is they still only have one operational at all, though they may have as many as 3. I've seen that number kind of bantied around a few times. But if they lost the T-14 in Ukraine, a likely occurrence, then the damage to Russia's military arms reputation would be unmeasurable. Nobody would be able to look at Russia and say and give them any serious thought as far as a weapons provider. This is one that's just talking about the average daily number of Russian casualties killed and wounded in Ukraine throughout February at 983 per day. That's nearly 1,000 people losing their lives on the front lines on just the Russian side. This does not reflect the other parts of the losses there, the civilians that are being killed on the Ukrainian side, the vast amounts of damage to people's lives and livelihood, to their homes, and to just their way of life. So they're just talking about that being the highest it's been since the start of the war. Of course, that's because Russia has been on the attack. And when you're on the attack, you're going to lose more men by and large. There's been some indications that Serbian agents are being used to infiltrate the European Union. They're particularly talking about a Serbian national named Novaka Antic to infiltrate these institutions and spread pro-Kremlin views. Russia has been at war with the West for decades upon decades. It's clear that they have been on a war footing even since right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They're fighting. They're at war with us. It's high time we actually acknowledge that. A railway bridge was blown up in Russia's Samara Oblast, and I believe there is the picture, yep. As you can see, if we can let me get this a little bit bigger for you. Look at that damage, and it looks like it actually shifted the bridge deck down and resulted in effectively an ineffective bridge. There's no way it could potentially be you can't just drive over that now. It would not hold anything near its rated weight. So interesting to see, and it says that engineering explosives were used to do this task. We're thinking the Ukrainian sabotage groups have been more effective than normal. Russian troops have been deploying combat helicopters in the ruins of Azovstal. They're using nearby private homes as their quarters as well. Interesting to see, and shows you the value of even these ruins. More than anything else, though, it gives the Ukrainians another target. Brief pause here. Robbie says during the Carlson-Putin interview, Putin described the operation in Ukraine as not significant. Wonder if that is the reason for not servicing higher tech to Ukraine, or is actually all they have. To a certain extent, that's all they have. If they're not going to deploy T-14 Armada, of which they only have one or a few, to Ukraine, it also indicates that they aren't taking it. They could potentially take it more seriously. However, looking at the long term, even if they lost this war, they could still make the case that they have got this amazing tank that if somebody wants to buy, we can produce it for them. They just got to provide the cash and we'll find a way. If they lost their best gear, now understand they have lost a lot of their best gear. They deployed BMP Terminator, and that was lost early on. They've deployed T-90s, which is their current top-end battle tank. T-72s, which are in heavy service throughout. They've even gotten down to T-55s. They've deployed the only aviation that I've not seen deployed is their latest stuff, though my understanding is that the Su-57 did some extremely safe missile launches from over Russian territory into Ukraine. So it may have been used, but it's not being used in a way that puts it at risk. Again, I suspect they just don't have the ability to manufacture and replace their really good stuff. And they may, at this point, if they were winning outright, they'd take those kinds of risks. But when they're not winning outright, the risks are too high. Losing one in a winning war is far less of damage to Russia than losing one in a losing war. Because if you throw your best at the enemy and you win, even if they destroyed your best, you still won. It worked. If you throw your best at the enemy and you lose, you're out of everything, including the reputation that you may have had. That's just my thoughts. Ukraine's intelligence group has taken responsibility for the oil depot strike in Belgorod. I mentioned that early in the Russian part of this. They're now taking responsibility for it. Speaking of, there have been a lot of the Russian mill bloggers complaining about these attacks in their rear areas, which sounds bad, but that's not what it means. Ukraine's been hitting Russian oil refineries and air bases in Crimea and Leningrad and any other of the rear areas. And that is how they're going to have to do it if they're going to win the war, because you cannot afford to only destroy the things that are in your country when they can take off, drop their bombs, and never even cross the border. From Jason J. Smart from the Kiev Post, he talks about the overall situation on the weapons on both sides. He's saying Ukraine is losing lives daily as Western allies fail to supply weapons, but Russia's showing off their new arsenal of Shahed drones. They're getting weapons and equipment from Iran and North Korea, mainly because those countries really know they aren't at any real risk. As long as they're not actively marching across the border, there's virtually no chance that the Western powers will actually strike their facility. So they can afford to send everything they've got. Those of us in the West don't have that same luxury. Participants of Navalny's funeral and memorial rallies are beginning to be detained. Anybody who is an active participant who also was visible in some way, shape, or form will absolutely be arrested and thrown into jail. I would say I'm glad this doesn't happen in the West, but we're seeing indications that there are people in the West doing the same thing. That said, I wouldn't want to be in a Russian jail no matter what. So I understand that this is going to be bad news for the Russian opposition. That said, there's been more indications that Russians are starting to actually rise up a little bit in the ways that they know how to. How long ago did you lose sound, Paul? Because I can. So I'm usually about 8 seconds, so you should have sound back. Can you hear me now? Okay, I'm checking now just to see what's going on. Because the sound should still be there. Everything's good. This story. Okay, perfect. Perfect. I'm glad we're back then. Okay, so let's talk about the story about Tucker Carlson and this assassination attempt. It looked like the Russians had put out this whole propaganda piece about how the Ukrainian intelligence had managed to bribe a guy or pay off a guy to put a bomb on Tucker Carlson's car while he was interviewing Vladimir Putin. So that whole thing kind of went around, and of course it made its kerfuffle. Well, somebody did a little bit of digging, and they checked out the video. They checked out the sources, and it turned out there was some digital manipulation going on. So it looks like this was an entirely faked thing. It does not look like Ukraine paid anybody to try and assassinate Tucker Carlson. False information, fake news. And this here from Anton Herashchenko kind of goes through the whole thing. I'm going to drop the link right here if you want to go through all of it. But basically, the video was faked. The person asking the questions was not in the room with the person being interviewed. The information came through kind of a laundered source. And it appears to have been done entirely for propaganda purposes. Obviously, in fact. So the whole accusation, the whole thing is fake news. And the problem is that these things tend to be faked and get through long before we can find out anything else. So just watch out your information. Something felt wrong about it, and I don't remember if I reported it or not initially, but you got to watch out. You'll get fakes a lot more than you'll get real information. Or another way to say it is that the devil will lie to you 99 times to get that one lie through, the 100th item. Paul, that's not nice. You're going to make me laugh over here. And then I'm going to go into the Ruski Mir here. And this is from Dmitry Medvedev talking about Ukraine and saying that the idea of an independent Ukrainian identity must disappear for good. This map here is, of course, what we were talking about a little bit ago about Russia basically taking over all of the vital parts of Ukraine and leaving just this tiny little piece behind. But overall, it's clear that the purpose that Russia has is to destroy Ukraine. And I believe they feel they have to do it. Let me tell you why. Because Ukraine fought back. By fighting back, they have challenged they've challenged Russia. And if Russia doesn't literally crush Ukraine for committing the cardinal sin of refusing, of fighting back, they will have a tremendous amount of reputational damage that they may never recover from. And in fact, if it gets into the Russian general population as a mindset there may not be enough pieces of Vladimir Putin to go around. But that's my opinion on that. Therefore, they've got to destroy Ukraine. The problem is that it's clear they're not able to do so. And that's going to be the real story in the end. If the West supports Ukraine, actually supports Ukraine, and Ukraine successfully wins this war, this will bolster the West in ways that will last for generations. And it will absolutely crush the mindset that the Russian leadership has of being this expansionist empire, at least for the foreseeable future. Obviously, that will change at some time in the future, but I could at least see basically pushing them back into their country and actually giving them a rousing defeat, a true rout, could destroy that aspect of their leadership for decades. But allowing Russia to win will absolutely destroy the West. It will result in a loss of reputation for the United States in particular, but for Europe as well, that we are no longer the side you want to be on. But that's my thoughts. That's the reason why I think Dmitry Medvedev is saying that Ukraine has to be destroyed. They have to disappear for good. And that's all part of the Ruski Mir. And I'm going to take a brief pause for a moment to get a drink of water, but I've got something special for you, and then I'll come back to your comments. We're going to be talking about a statement by Emmanuel Macron right here. Let me go ahead and I have dubbed the vital piece, though.
Over the years...
Not that one. Hang on a second. I had it on a button. Let me just fix this here.
J'ai dit quel était le cadre.
I said what the framework was. I didn't say that there was a consensus. Yet, but I consider that it was important to do so because we must all be aware that this war affects us and we never want to see things as they are. But we must be lucid. It has been 2 years now that we have been repeating at press conferences. The war is returning to European soil. It has been 2 years. We have revealed the extent of the materials already delivered, the amounts already delivered. Is it our war or is it not our war? Can we turn away, consider that things can continue to play out? I do not believe, and therefore it is a strategic start to which I called, and which I fully assume we must be lucid about the reality of the situation, which is playing out in Europe, the risks which are at work, and what we must assume. I am convinced that precisely the assumed clarity of his words and what Europe needed, but instead go ask President Putin what he is prepared not to do. Who started the war in Ukraine? Vladimir Putin. Who threatens whatever we do, whatever we say, with nuclear weapons? President Putin. All turn around towards him to know what his strategic limits are. If every day we explain what our limits are in the face of someone who has none and launched this war, I can already tell you that the spirit of defeat is there lurking, not amongst us. That's Emmanuel Macron, and doggone it if he hasn't just literally done a 180 on his rhetoric. Before, he was pretty much appeasing and kind of holding back and providing some support, but, kind of a little bit wishy-washy. Then all of a sudden, look at what he is saying here. If every day we explain what our limits are in the face of someone who has none and launched this war, I can already tell you that the spirit of defeat is there lurking. We can't afford the spirit of defeat. And as he says, not amongst us. Now, before I move, kind of bip down the line here on some people's commentary on Emmanuel Macron's comments here, I'm going to quickly look at the comments here. And let's see, back up from there. Yeah, all the sound problems. A fake on a faker. Thank you very much. Paul says, notice Medvedev tries to bait Poland and Romania with the silly map. And Lucille says, do you think Putin is trying to provoke some Western country to declare war first so he can have his excuse to use his illicit chemical and possibly nuclear weapons? As far as that one goes, I don't think it makes any difference. Russia has already been at war with the West. I don't think there's any change in that status that would make any difference to what he's doing. I believe that even Vladimir Putin has a sense of self-preservation. And if he used nuclear weapons or significant amounts of chemical weapons. Now, understand there are some chemical weapons being used on the battlefield by Russia. Irritants mainly, but they could kill if you don't treat it pretty quick. But as far as nuclear weapons, I believe that if they use that on the battlefield, they will find that the world will convulse in revulsion. They will do anything to stop that, to stop the madman with nukes. The thing is that I think, at least my belief is that if they also recognize that submitting to the bully because he has a big stick in the form of nuclear weapons will mean that there will be no safety ever. There will be no way to be secure in their own homes. And thus, at that point, there will be no stopping the absolute total war that will take place. And even Vladimir Putin recognizes, I believe, that total war carried out at his trigger would mean there is nothing left to rule. There would be no Russia. There would likely also be no Europe to speak of. And the rebuilding of humanity in the most developed parts of the world would take generations. That said, there's an acknowledgement of war and Western powers marched soldiers into Ukraine, but not into Russia, I don't think that would start the nuclear war. My opinion. It's when they start crossing into Russia. And at that moment, all the gloves come off. And at that moment, I believe that that Vladimir Putin would feel there is nothing left to save. And therefore, he would pull the trigger. The question is, would his generals, would his staff follow the order? Would they push that button? That I do not know. So Macron is getting pretty heated in his responses here. He's calling for a united front and calling for ways and concrete proposals to strengthen support for Ukraine. They have been discussing the possibility of sending Western troops to Ukraine in non-combat engagement roles. One of the proposals I did see, I might add, would be to put Western troops on the border with Belarus in Ukraine and other potential areas, maybe some troops along the Transnistria border, places where are not currently hot, but if they freed up Ukrainian troops from those areas, it would really help Ukraine's military capabilities in tremendous ways. Sort of the equivalent of a peacekeeping force, or sort of along the lines of what the U.S. does in South Korea, where we keep a, not exactly token force, a significant force there, whose main goal is, ironically, to be the first ones to be hit and likely killed, triggering full war on the side of the U.S. I hate to say it that way, but that's kind of how it's treated. That would also put Belarus, in particular, on notice that if they march their soldiers across the border, they're not going against Ukraine, they're going against Western powers. And I don't know that Lukashenko is crazy enough to do that. Don't know. A Czech President, Peter Pavel, stated that there should be no limit regarding possibilities in support of Ukraine, with Emmanuel Macron actually urging Ukraine's allies not to be cowards in supporting the country to fight off the Russian invasion. As he said, "We are surely approaching a moment for Europe in which it will be necessary not to be cowards. War has returned to our land. It's kind of crazy seeing Macron stepping into this power vacuum, being evacuated and left by the United States. Poland was kind of working on stepping into that role, but I think Poland's got their hands full with their own internal and external issues. They're spending like crazy on their defense in Poland. The Czech Republic is, I think Peter Pavel is showing some real leadership here. But this is the first time I've seen France step up. And France is a nuclear power. There's some real weight when they step into that role. And when France is the one calling you out for being a coward, you better start listening. World War started in that area. Macron does know something, Paul. And he knows more than he's letting on. That takes us to the international part of this. So let's go ahead and move forward with the international stuff. Which, of course, is all going to have to be translated because some of these tabs have refreshed. The German defense... let me move this over into this area here, and I'm going to do it all at the same time. The German defense ministers declared their allies that the army's communication system remains reliable. This is after, let me see if I can find it. I don't have the original details here. I have articles talking about it, though. There was a recording published by the Russians where the Germans were talking about the possibility of sending high-tech missiles to Ukraine, Taurus in particular, talking about a bunch of other things, a bunch of defense things. The fact that this call was leaked at all, since it was secret and held on reportedly secure communication systems, really sent a ripple of dismay amongst Western powers, showing that there's some holes in their IT and their security systems. There were a bunch of things they discussed. It was a fairly long call. The publication, originally they called it disinformation, but later they actually confirmed the line that the call was legit. It actually did happen. Then there was, of course, how did it happen? Somebody said that an officer in Singapore used an insecure line and it was tapped that way. An individual error causing the problem. Overall, the situation, though, is that the leak being legitimate causes a lot of consternation with IT crews over in Germany and across the Western world. They're going to have to find out where the leak really is. This idea that was possibly done in Singapore is possible, but I would suggest that knowing that to tap a Singapore hotel line in order to get this information seems like it's a stretch. I think it's much more likely that the leak is from inside Germany through some situation in that area. A lot of this is just meant to stir up some discord with this wiretap leak. But overall, they're sticking with this story. It's possible. Using hotel Wi-Fi or a mobile phone or LAN like that does pretty much put you at risk. But why aren't they using proper tunneling equipment? You should be able to use a VPN. And no, I'm not going to suddenly start marketing a VPN for you. But they should have been able to use a proper secure connection, even through an insecure one, with a proper VPN tunnel that would have prevented this from happening. And that's my concern. And if this person didn't use a proper VPN, they need to have their hands smacked, and they need to be shown exactly how they're going to handle this in the future, possibly after they spend some time cleaning the latrine with their toothbrush. Now let's continue on with the international front here. Well, here's your obvious news of the day. From the German defense minister, Russia wants to provoke division in Germany. They have got their spies out there in force. They probably call them, diplomatic crew, but otherwise it's spies. They've been really working on putting the screws to Europe. Germany was a major player here. They want to absolutely cause as much division in Germany and anywhere else they can. They've already been shown to be doing disinformation operations in France as well as other countries. We're seeing the situation in Poland, likely triggered by Russian spies. It's crazy. The U.S. State Department announced new sanctions on Wagner and the Russian Air Force. The only question I have is, why didn't they do it before? Kirby, the White House spokesperson, said that Zelensky is not asking for U.S. troops in Ukraine. They're just asking for hardware and ammunition. He followed that up by stating that there's not going to be U.S. troops on the ground fighting inside Ukraine. Yeah, Paul, Macron absolutely has the right approach as well. They've got to deal with this situation head on. You don't stop the bully by just rolling over. You got to face him head on. Europe has been getting a lot more serious about their defense. Europe has been for decades saying, oh, if anything really goes wrong, the U.S. will have our backs. This situation in Ukraine is highlighting a particular vulnerability, namely the European reliance on American hardware and American troops. They're getting serious now. They're working on a new European defense industrial strategy to take the whole of the European Union onto a wartime footing, actually put their economy into wartime footing, getting the production of defense hardware in Europe up to snuff so that they can truly face both Russia and support Ukraine at the same time. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Russian military commanders, specifically Admiral Viktor Sokolov and Lieutenant General Sergei Kobyalash. Now, for Sokolov, we've not seen him alive in public for some time. So this could mean a lot of things. I've seen no proof that he's still alive, but interesting to see the ICC had issue these warrants. Turkey's oil depot in the Mediterranean Sea has put time out on business with Russia. With U.S. sanctions being kind of putting pressure on them, they're saying, I don't want to be part of taking part in Russia's oil. So they're saying no to it. Gas imports from Russia have fallen by 71% since 2021. Let's get that to 100%. Lithuanian farmers, instead of complaining about Ukrainian grain, are complaining about Russian grain. They have seen this huge influx of Russian grain coming into their markets and flooding their market and causing the price of their grain to drop. This includes apparently 3 million tons of Russian grain. I wonder how much of that's actually Ukrainian grain. Here is talking about the war economy mode here. They've got some specifics that they're kind of working on. They need to be in this war mode because war is in Europe and there is no denying it. Lithuania is joining the ammunition initiative for Ukraine that the Czech Republic has been working on. Those artillery shells, my understanding is they're starting to show up in Ukraine already, and they can absolutely use them. Kind of a tangential thing, Albania has reopened a communist era airbase after refurbishing it for NATO. This will make it NATO's largest tactical airbase in the region. Poland is now asking the European Union to sanction Russian and Belarusian agricultural products. Again, I'm going to say Why didn't you do this before? And the situation in Moldova and Transnistria is getting really tense. Russia's been putting a lot of pressure there. Of course, as I said, they're watching that area closely, and there's a possibility that Russian influence may take over some of that area in Moldova. They're going to have to watch that super close. According to the Wall Street Journal, U.S. chips are flowing to Russia from China via Central Asia. So a complex route of getting those chips routed to Russia. And they're going to have to find a way to cut that off if it's really going to make a dent in Russia's war production. Schultz has once again ruled out the possibility of sending tourists to Ukraine, stating that he would have to put German soldiers there in order to control it. This resulted in what could potentially be one of the biggest intelligence faults of the war, where he declared, when he said this, that French and British troops were in Ukraine actually working on the targeting. That may or may not be true. If it is true, bad Schultz. No, you don't tell the enemy those things. And if it isn't true, then he better start watching his sources of information. Belgium has expelled dozens of Russian spies in recent months. The Russians say, oh, those were diplomats. No, they were spies. The U.S. has banned AMD from supplying chips manufactured specifically for the Chinese market to China. That's because that's becoming two reasons. Number one, it would advance China's AI game, and they've been working on stopping that with every method they can. But number two, it also means that China could send those chips to Russia. And Finland has stated outright that any weapons that they send can be used against military targets in Russia. That's the way to do it. The way Ukraine's going to win this war is by attacking not just targets within Ukraine, but targets on the territory of Russia that are supporting the assaults on Ukraine. And Finland stepped up to the plate. Now, I kind of talked about the problems with the German call. There's been a lot of talk about confidential information getting kind of spread around. Like this one, a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel leaked classified information about Ukraine on a dating site. People, if you have access to secret or classified information, it's not worth your freedom. It's not worth the people's lives to leak it to impress a girl. The odds are that girl is either Chinese or Russian. It doesn't matter. Don't put it on a dating site. Don't say it. Don't even mention it. We trust you with our biggest secrets. Don't show us that trust is misplaced. In that same vein, the Intelligence Directorate of Ukraine actually managed to gain access to Russian Defense Ministry servers and obtained a lot of information about military leadership, orders, reports, and directives. This gives them more understanding of how things work in Russia and gives them more opportunities to insert problems into Russia's command chain. Let's go ahead and move on to the front lines. There have been some changes, but not as many over the last few days. Still, it's some tough fighting in Ukraine. Kirby says that Vladimir Putin is taking advantage of delays in U.S. aid. This is not a surprise to anybody who's been watching the war overall. It's clear that he's throwing everything he can at it right now in hopes of capturing a lot more territory before any additional aid comes in, or before Europe manages to really amp up their production. Now we've got several days of updates here that we can go through here. Let's see if we can get back a few and kind of take it step by step. So we already did the first. Let's go to the second here. That's a clarified. Don't care about that. Nova Mikhailovka looks like it's going to be a rough one for a bit here. This was from the second, third, and a few clarifications. They're inside the city or village itself now. That's going to make things a lot rougher for Ukraine. And then, of course, frontline clarifications. Not a lot of major changes. Let's go ahead and just take a look near Avdiivka itself, which is where most of the changes have been going, just to make sure there's no changes over the last few days to speak of. Yeah, just this stuff near Orlivka has managed to get updated here. There's been no changes near Robotna to speak of. The Russians are really assaulting hard in that area right now. The other area, I think I mentioned it last time, was Krinky, near Kozachi Leheri. And Ukraine managed to advance a little bit closer to Kozachi Leheri in the last few days, which this map actually doesn't show. The other big area that Russia's pushing is here near Kupiansk. They are desperate to take Sinkivka. And so the assaults have been heavy. They've been throwing hardware in there, tanks and armored personnel carriers. Meat wave attacks, a lot of them. Let's go ahead and move on. According to the Kiev Independent, Ukraine has stopped Russian advances in some areas near Avdiivka. Still lots of fighting going on. It's not a pretty picture, no matter how you slice that. French AASM 250 Hammer actually was used in Kozachi Leheri, which is on the left bank. This was a guided bomb that struck a Russian base. It looks like Ukraine is working hard to disrupt things on the left bank of the Dnieper River. They've already still got that foothold in Krinky. They still got the men over near the Antonovsky Bridge. The more they disrupt things here, the more resources Russia will have to put there, or the more opportunities that Ukraine will have. Wargonzo basically confirms that there's no significant changes to the front lines. He does talk about the fierce fighting in the area of Sinkivka. It calls them fierce battles in Tabevka and Sinkivka, and reporting that Ukrainian positions are under attack. Understand Wargonzo sees this war from the Russian side. And that's kind of the front lines there. There is, in fact, video out there of the first actual destruction of a HIMARS launcher. I don't think I've got the full video here. It happened in the, well, let me see here. Yeah, near Chasiv Yar, apparently. So the Ukrainians are having to bring these closer to the front lines to make more effective use of their long-range capabilities. And so we're seeing the more possibility. We did see a couple of them return to the U.S. for refurbishment after taking battle damage. Now we're seeing one actually destroyed. Even Gray Zone got in on this. That's the Wagner affiliated account, which now appears to be more Ministry of Defense affiliated overall. But yeah, this is the first actual confirmation of the loss of a HIMARS launcher. Then we get into the extras, and I'm kind of all over the map on this stuff. Yesterday, I believe it was the anniversary of Stalin's death. And for some reason, the Communist Party has asked the Russians to look into, was the West involved in Stalin's death? They're reaching. They want any reason they can think of to blame the West for everything. Everything's the West's fault. Russia ever the victim. This is a weird story out of occupied Berdyansk. A Russian military force came to a traffic checkpoint. There we go. And they basically took the police officers prisoner. After a little bit of talking, they released the police officers, and the commander of the military unit then drove up in a car. The police realized that he was driving on a suspended license and arrested him and several of the military members. It seems like if the Russian military hadn't decided to mess with the police force there, they wouldn't have ended up with multiple arrests of their Russian military members. Just crazy. It's just a weird story. A resident of Yakutia tried to smuggle out a woolly rhinoceros skull from Russia to the UK, and he did it by disguising the pieces, as these, I guess, octopuses here. Just an interesting, weird story. I mean, it looks really great, but they discovered it, and he did not get away with it. A video has been out there, and I don't think I've got the video in my stuff here, but 7 Indian citizens, and that's people from India, put out a video message saying they were being forced to fight in the war in Ukraine on the side of Russia. And they claim that they basically went to this travel agency. They arranged this trip, and the agent kind of suggested that they could make a stop in Belarus. When they showed up in Belarus, the police took them into custody, confiscated their IDs, then asked for bribes. They gave the bribe, and then, of course, the guy took them into custody and took all their stuff and said the only way out of this is you can spend 10 years in a Russian jail, or you can go to the front in Ukraine. They've signed some documents that they say were in Russian, and therefore they couldn't read them, and now they're forced to fight in the war in Ukraine. I might suggest that they call that I Want to Live hotline. Robbie says, I wonder if there is heightened levels of discord between Russian police and military. A legal way to protest the war. That's possible. I've seen several incidents between Russian police and Russian military over the last 6 months. Nothing really recent except for this one. So there could be some other factors that are really in concern. You may have noticed yesterday there were a bunch of internet outages. In fact, the day before yesterday and yesterday. That appears to be because some of the global internet cables that are in the Red Sea were cut, potentially by the Houthis. That's 4 out of the 15 submarine cables were critically damaged, they said. Is it a deliberate action? Some people have said it might be from the sunken freighter that the Houthis hit that may have done something to these cables when it sank. I don't know for sure, though no matter what, you can blame the Houthis for it. Check out this weird thing. In Ukraine, an ordinary pickup truck can be transformed into a nightmare car, which destroys the enemy with the use of 122 millimeter projectiles. These look like grad launcher tubes. And they do this to just anything they can get their hands on. They'll mount some grad launcher tubes to a pickup truck, to cars. I think I saw a Mercedes the other day. Just interesting to see. Over in Crimea, there is still indications that there is a robust anti-Russian sentiment. On this sign that reminds voters that elections are coming, there is a sticker or a post on the bottom that says, Crimea will be Ukraine. Deoccupation in 2024. Occupiers get out. That had to take some real guts to put that up there on that sign. So there is a strong undercurrent of rebellion against Russia in Crimea. This video is 42 seconds long. Let me see, let's hang on a second here for me.
If it is able to retain control...
Let me go ahead and start this over again.
If Russia wins this war, or if it to put it very, very modestly, if it is able to retain control of those parts of Ukraine that it currently does control, that land bridge, so-called, that extends right down to Crimea, which it annexed in 2014, that will be the first big defeat of Cold War II for the West, because we were all in. We were all in our support for Zelensky. How many speeches did Western leaders make in support of Ukraine? How many promises did they make? How many pledges were there to be there for as long as it took? If we lose, our credibility is shot. And then turn to the Middle East. What if there is an all-out multi-front assault on Israel? If Russia wins this war.
So that was Neil Ferguson, a Scottish-American historian, talking at the Hoover Institution. Not talking at the Hoover Institution, but he's with the Hoover Institution, expressing what's at risk here. If the West is all in, as they claim to be, and yet Russia wins, it will be tremendous loss of power. This one is just cool. No other way to say it. X-Men star and American actor Leif Schreiber has met with Ukrainian children who were rescued from Russian captivity. He traveled with them to New York to tell the UN Security Council about the horrors they faced after they were kidnapped by Russians. Talking about the time they were in captivity and not knowing if they would be able to see their loved ones again. Just quite the... Some people are putting their whole into this, their whole heart. And absolute respect to them for it, for bringing the truth of the matter to the public in any way they can. Over in the South China Sea, a collision between a Chinese Coast Guard vessel and a Philippine boat. And during this situation, the Chinese used a water cannon. Check this out. The water cannon was powerful enough to destroy the windows of this Philippine vessel. That is just showing how much China is emboldened. If the West does not put the genie back in the bottle, if the West doesn't confront this head on and win, China will see no reason for them to stop. They're already moving forward with their plans. They're already causing provocations near Taiwan. They're already trying to drive the Philippines out of their own land in the South China Sea. And if we don't recover from this, there will be really no hope. And here's some of that footage of the collision between the two ships here. You can see it in this corner here. That is the type of situation we're looking at, the concerns that people should have at this point in time. The fact is that we are, instead of being the shining city on a hill, we're turning that over to dictators like Xi and Putin. And if we don't fight for that position, for that shining city on the hill, there will be generations that do not know freedom and have no hope of ever seeing it again. And that's everything for today. Thank you all for joining me. I absolutely appreciate every one of you. Paul, Robbie, Lucille, if you're here, Jerry, I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you for being here. It makes this so much more interesting and so much easier to know that you guys can respond to me and be able to talk back and forth. You guys are what make these live streams amazing, and I appreciate every bit of it. If you enjoyed today's video, hit me with that old thumbs up. Subscribe if you are new here, though I think everybody here right now has already subscribed, and I appreciate you for it. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next live stream.